Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Did everyone have an early night? Get some good sleep? Really bright-eyed, bushy-tailed?
Hungover?
Everyone go to housing after dark? Just kidding, I don't know what that is. I heard there was something like that. Well, good morning. There are I know some people are still coming in. There's, I believe, a number of people online watching us from wherever they are. So we will be presenting up here, but our presenters are all actually in person, and then we will save questions till the end, and we'll take questions from the audience as well as from the folks who are watching virtually. So welcome to Motivating Your Clients Toward Shared Housing. And I think that you are in for a great presentation. I know that you're in for a great presentation because I know the two fabulous presenters who are going to talk to us today about all of their experience from Los Angeles and also just their experience from many communities in the country too about what is happening around trying to get folks into housing and the challenges around that and some very innovative solutions. And so the reason we are here today is really to talk about our whole conference is to talk about getting people into housing, right? And so from people experiencing homelessness and for the folks who are serving those people, we have many, many tools in our box, and we are really always trying to make sure that we have the number of units, the number of PSH, the number of apartments that we need, and we always do, right? Wrong. We never have enough, right? We always are in the situation where we are trying to figure out how to be innovative about getting people into housing. How many folks here are working for a homeless system or a homeless program, or kind of coming from the homelessness side? Okay, so I'm assuming that a bunch of folks are here from the affordable housing, developers, funders. Okay, so we will try to not use acronyms, right? And try to make sure that we are sort of speaking to a broad audience. I think, though, that this is probably going to make sense to all of you when I say the reason we're here is because we are all trying to deal with the housing shortage across the state, right? No matter what communities we're from. I'm from San Francisco, which I should have introduced myself first. My name is Cynthia Nagendra. I am a deputy director at the City of San Francisco's Homeless Department, the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. We have a slight housing problem in San Francisco, like I'm sure many of you do across the state. And I think no matter if you're in a rural community, a suburban community, an urban community, we're all really dealing with a vacancy issue. And that means that we are having to be more and more creative. One of the things that we're having happen in San Francisco is, and I think this is true really across the state, we're lucky to have a lot of local funding, and now more state funding and more federal funding. So we have more funding, and as we're learning, more funding does not mean more housing right away, right? So we're trying to figure out how to get people into housing. Even though we have all these subsidies, we're really having a capacity problem and a unit problem. And so what I want to talk about is why shared housing is important. I think that it's going to be pretty obvious to the folks that are here. And really, we're going to talk about really how you do it and innovative ways to do it that are going to make it pretty applicable to a lot of different situations and a lot of different communities. And so I wanted to, there we go. So I think we all already know these things, but I'll just say it because we want to start from the place of why are we even talking about shared housing? So we have a housing shortage. We all know that. It's certainly true in California, and really it's true across the country. So we're 7.2 million units short, and that means short of affordable housing units, and that's starting to affect more and more and more people, right? It's not just people living under the poverty line. More and more people are actually rent burdened and extremely rent burdened. In San Francisco, over 50% of all renters are rent burdened, and about 27% of people are extremely rent burdened. So that's people who are paying well over 50 to 70% of their income to rent, and so that's way more people than are even experiencing homelessness, right? So a lot of people are starting to really understand the correlation between housing cost and actually being able to keep your housing. And so those 7.2 million more affordable housing units are needed for extremely low income folks, but we also just need to be having way more supply across our whole communities, right? Of course, we're trying to do that quickly, but that's gonna take some time. So we have to figure out ways to use the rental market in as many ways as we can to create that capacity. We know on any given night in this country, over 500,000 people are experiencing homelessness. A lot of our communities just did a new point in time count, and that means that we did a count of people who are experiencing homelessness on one night. That doesn't mean that that number is the sort of stable number of all the people who are experiencing homelessness over the year, right? So there's many, many more people who experience homelessness over the year. It's on a given night. So in California, we have over 50% of people in the country that are experiencing homelessness here in California. Again, a lot to do with housing costs. And so 75% of all extremely low-income households pay more than half of their income to rent. As I said before, that's across the states. And we have a really underfunded affordable housing Section 8 program, right? So 1 in 4 extremely low-income households who need assistance are getting it. Working on the federal side, on the state side, to really advocate for more vouchers. But again, even if we had more affordable housing vouchers, we still need places to put people, right? So this is just a map of the United States, so you can sort of see that there is not one state in this country that has enough affordable housing units. And so if you look at this is from Out of Reach, which is from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's website. They have fantastic data. They do this report every year. If you're looking for your state or your community, you can drill down all the way into your community to see this really represents the hourly wage that a full-time worker must earn when working a 40-hour week. And the darker the state, the more someone has to earn. And you can see the 2-bedroom housing wage there at the bottom. And so if you are in California, I can actually take you to this data. In California, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $2,000, and we know that it's much higher in communities like many of the ones we live in. And what does that mean? It means that you have to earn as a household over almost $7,000 monthly or $81,000 annually to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And I know it's much higher in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles. And so that means that people have to be working hourly wages that are way more than one job. Sometimes it's 2 jobs, sometimes it's 3 jobs. And so we have to keep remembering that even when people are able to get into a unit, even if they get a Section 8 voucher, being able to pay for that unit, especially if you're paying 30% of your income to rent, even then it's very, very challenging. So $39 per hour for state housing wage. Most folks aren't making that are extremely low income, obviously. And so we have to think about how can we make housing more affordable. And that means we have to subsidize housing in all kinds of ways and also maximize the number of units that we have. So I'm gonna stop there and I'm gonna hand it over to Chris Freed from Los Angeles Family Housing. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. But Chris Freed has been in the field of homelessness for, I won't tell you how long, a long time, and has spoken about shared housing all over the country because of the work that they're doing in LA Family Housing. And so many communities are coming to LA Family Housing to really understand how they're doing this because they are figuring out really how to match people in really innovative ways.
Wake up. You get the fun pleasure. Everyone that did not come here today, they're missing out. They about to get a show of some sort, some kind. Whoops. I'm using your computer.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but I want your computer too, so there you go. Yeah, there. So this is a really funny little video. None of you got to watch because there's no internet in this room. But essentially, it's like if you can imagine here to the wall and no bathroom and 2 people are living in it in New York, because that's kind of what it's like in New York. So I usually like to, when I start moderating, usually I like to start my session by saying, how many of y'all have ever lived in shared housing? So I'm gonna do that. How many of y'all? And even for the people, yeah, if you raise your hand, and for people on Zoom, just give a thumbs up. Okay, let me try this. How many have not? You weren't born. Or maybe you were raised by your family pet. All of us at some point of our life have lived in some form of shared housing, right? How many of you are married? Yeah, you share. Believe you me, you share. How many of you have kids? You share. And you don't always want to share because they're not always the best people to live with, but that's just the reality of our world. So I think Cynthia kind of teed it up in saying that shared housing really is about much more than just the affordability piece, although the affordability piece is really probably one of the biggest drivers. We used to say, and I know that we wrote this in our little synopsis basically for this group, which was, we used to say there wasn't enough affordable housing, and that's still true. Then we moved on to there wasn't enough permanent supportive housing. By the way, that is also still true. But the reality is now we do not have enough singles and one bedrooms and efficiencies and studios and call it whatever you want to call it. We do not have enough to serve the number of people that we are seeing falling into homelessness every day. And the reality is that we have to do something differently if we're truly going to be able to address this problem. So when we talk about this, we are not talking, I want to be really clear, when we're talking about shared housing, we're not talking about a 2-bedroom apartment, 8 people, bunch of bunk beds, or a 4-bedroom house with a bunch of people and bunk beds and rooms where you charge them a lot of money, or cheaper money, let's say, but still very expensive for like a bunk bed. What we're talking about here is a 2-bedroom apartment, 2 people, 3-bedroom apartment, 3 people, 4-bedroom apartment, 4 people. Could be a couple, could be a young person with an old person. So all of those things that we're hoping that you'll consider during this session. So why shared housing? I just gave you a bunch of them, but there's a lot of other things too, right? There's things like having and developing friendships and social relationships with people. What we know from people that are experiencing homelessness is they really need that social network to be able to stay afloat. And more often than not, what we see with even in like large encampments or encampments just in general, there's very few encampments that are just an encampment of 1. There's typically at least an encampment of 2, and that's because people just typically and historically need each other. We are like beings that need other people. So we know that the wages haven't necessarily gone up, even in the state of California, where we're seeing the rise in wages. We're seeing the rise probably double to triple in what it's costing to rent an apartment. So it doesn't pan out, and so we're still in the same boat. All right, so gives you access to great, look, you can read the slides. I'm not gonna sit here and read the slides, but I think what's really important to understand is that you really can access way more by looking into using ways like shared housing to house folks. And by the way, for the developers out there, this is a great way. A few years ago, I remember I had a bet with one of my colleagues who said, we will never build PSH shared housing. I said, I take that bet. I take that bet because I actually think you will at some point. I think it is a smarter way relative to some people just needing other people, and building 2-bedroom apartments is way cheaper than building a 1-bedroom apartment. Because what is the most expensive thing to build in an apartment? Oh, come on, developers, you know this. There you go. So if you have a half bath and a full bath and 1 kitchen, way cheaper than building 2 1-bedroom or 2 studio apartments. Okay, moving on. So really, why shared? Can you do this for me? Okay, thank you. I'm a little slow. So really, why shared housing? I mean, from my standpoint, why I started talking about this years ago is because I started seeing, even when we were doing an amazing job of housing people through rapid rehousing and getting people quickly off the street, we were still seeing more people fall into homelessness than we had in the past. And because of that, there was a really quick way to stop people from ever coming in our front door. And that was, hey, do you have a friend? Do you have a parent? Do you have somebody that we can move you back in with to prevent you from ever coming into the shelter system? Because once you come into the shelter system, it takes a long time to get you out. And so we were trying to do whatever we possibly could to keep people from ever entering the system. But as time went on, we started really recognizing that it's great. I have 100 units and 100 landlords right now that are willing to rent units to our clients. But when I have 10,000 people in my community, the math doesn't add up. So we needed to do something different. Next slide, please. So who does shared housing? Really important thing to consider. Most people will say it works for those people, but it doesn't work for my people. And I call, am I allowed to cuss? It's like who I am. I call bullshit. Excuse me, sorry. This is a new conference for me. I do this at the National Alliance all the time, and they just know me because I'm on their little circuit. I'm gonna try to contain myself today, keep it as vanilla as possible. But I do call it, because the reality is shared housing works for everybody. Again, how many of y'all are married? How many of y'all had kids? How many of y'all were born? Like, we all figured out how to live with other people at some point. And so it works for single adults. Single adults can live with families. Families can live with a transition age youth. A transition age youth can live with a senior, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about our tool in a minute. We created a match tool because, you know, people living with people is an intimate experience, so you better like the person you live with. But the reality is that even in our match tool recently, we've seen more seniors and TAY youth actually being matched than anybody else. So that was just really interesting. But it's for people with high acuity, people with low acuity, people, anybody. Doesn't matter. And it doesn't, what's the most important is that you're matching people who want to actually live together. Next slide, please. So what's required when you do shared housing? There's like 3 major components. That is, 1, each household has to have their own lease. It's a requirement. It's a requirement. So this is a really hard sell, by the way. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is easy. It is a really hard sell for landlords to be able to split the leases. Their attorneys advise them not to. I would state the opposite. When you're dealing with really low income folks, it's better for you to split the lease because at least you get something versus nothing. If you have to evict somebody, it costs you, right? You can't collect any rent during the entire process. Oh. Slowly. Okay, I'm going to try. I am from California. I am from Los Angeles, but I think most people always say, are you from New York? Because I talk really fast. I'm sorry. So I will try to speak more slowly. But, so they have to have their own lease. Every household has to be willing to participate. If you force somebody into shared housing, guess what they're going to do? Leave. And then go right back to a tent, which is not the idea. And then the final piece is that they have to decide who they're going to live with for a couple of different reasons. One, from an agency perspective, I don't want to get sued because I forced 2 people to live together and somebody got hurt. So you have to decide who you're going to live with because then you've made the decision and it wasn't us forcing you into anything. So I think that's really important. Next slide, please. What's required from the landlord? Basically, don't be a slumlord. Like, the reality is that there's still rules that you have to follow relative to what's fair market rent. And I think that we can do something a little bit different to help landlords want to try this measure by giving them some form of incentive, which could be an increased rent, because obviously if you have more people living in a unit, the reality is you're going to have more water costs, more gas costs, or whatever the trash cost, all of those different things. But essentially, because they have their own lease, you cannot kick them out. So if they're drinking a beer, so what? If they're smoking crack, well, that's where you, yeah, I know. But that's where you have to rely on the services on the back end to come in and really step up and be able to help and get people connected to the right service. So they have to follow all of the same habitability laws as they would in any one of our typical PSH or any market rate unit. Next slide, please. So I think one of the biggest problems that I've had personally with shared housing has been my own team, right? So at LA Family Housing, I have a team of about 400 social service staff. And convincing them that shared housing is the right way to go has been pretty difficult in some circumstances because they say the clients don't want to do it or participants don't want to do it. The reality is that we have to do a better job of training our staff about what the realities are in our housing market. And so I've spent a tremendous amount of time making lots, and at the end of this, you will see, at the end of my slide, you'll see this very, very long list of resources that you could potentially check into. One of them, the first one, is a very long, boring video that I did, but it really talked about the housing market, particularly here in California, and the importance of understanding and knowing that and training your staff to be able to talk about it. Because if your staff believe in it, they can sell it. If they don't believe in it, they're not going to sell it, or they're going to force it and say, your only option is this. And people, these are adults. No adult wants to be told what they have to do. People want to be able to make a decision about what they want to do. So it's really important that you train your staff. It's really important that your staff understand the housing market and that they understand that we do not have enough units. So it's great. Los Angeles got 6,800 new EHV vouchers. Amazing. And since June of last year, we've leased up 290. Scary, right? Huh? 6,800 vouchers, almost a year, 290 leased up. Part of it is because our messaging in Los Angeles is not clear. We do not have enough one-bedrooms, studio apartments for everyone who's going to get a voucher in hand to be able to find your own unit. We move lots of people in under rapid rehousing, tons. Veronica's going to talk about how she's been able to do this, but tons of people in on rapid rehousing, and they need to be able to transition in place. We're moving them into shared situations, 2 bedrooms. They need to stay in that place. People are like, oh no, I got my 1 bedroom, I can go now. But there aren't any 1 bedrooms for you to find. So you're gonna have a 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 lease up. And with COVID, what we've seen is more and more, particularly of the lower end unit apartments that we have the greatest access to, have not turned over because evictions have been almost impossible. Next slide. External messaging, really important that we as a community start talking about shared housing and split leases and the need to increase the number of shared housing opportunities amongst us. Because even though I like to talk about this at the National Alliance, where we have all providers, or mostly providers, the importance is that if we collectively start pushing this, the narrative starts changing, policies start changing, it becomes easier, it becomes the norm. Shared housing in college towns, any of you go to college? Just kidding. Okay, so in bigger college towns, right, and at the University of Oregon, all around the university, there's tons and tons and tons of like condos and apartments, and all of them split their leases because they're splitting, right? My friends' kids, they go there, they're like, I'm not signing for the whole damn apartment, I'm signing for the one room that my kid uses. That way if her friends or his friends destroy the rest of the apartment, I'm not responsible for that, I'm only responsible for this one room. So it's totally normal in those towns, but it is not normal in our lower end apartments. But we need to change the message. It's on us to change that message so that the policies start to follow. And that landlords start to see, this is a really good viable option, and I can actually make money, more money, and I can collect money. Even if one person doesn't pay rent, I can still collect the rent from the other people in the house. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things, though, of this is matching, right? Because, again, people have to decide who they're going to live with in the apartment that they want to live with. And so LA Family Housing created a tool. It's called Arroyo, a room of your own. It is like Match.com. We stole a lot of their concepts. We're sorry, Match.com. But we built in our own algorithms at the end. And it's being piloted right now between my organization, Veronica's organization, Hopix, and a couple of others in Los Angeles. But essentially what it does is you put your information in, and it starts to match. It's a little bit different than like a college type because it really starts to speak to the things that not only our participants go through, but human beings go through. So real life questions like, I'm gonna give you an example. Here we go. I like sports. I like sports so much. Fantastic. Okay, so you go home and your roommate is hooping and hollering in front of the TV at a bowling match. Couldn't believe who won, so excited, making so much noise, blah, blah, blah. A, gotta get the hell out of here. B, man, I need to have a conversation, but I can deal with it. C, all good, doesn't bother me at all. So it really starts to dive into what people are thinking and try to pair it up so that they're matching people's personalities. Because what we know is, again, living with someone is a really intimate experience, and if you don't like them, it's never going to work. It's never gonna work. Just think of how many marriages end in divorce. How many is that rate? I think it's like 70%. Yeah, it's pretty high. Lots of other things happen in between too. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we put people in the best light. So this tool, we've talked about this a lot on the National Alliance side, but we probably by July, hopefully we'll be able to start marketing it out. But it is a really, really helpful tool. It's super cool, and it can be tailored to any community. Next slide. Yeah, for people that are on or that get this deck, you'll be able to, I think it's uploaded in the system, but if it's not, feel free at the end to just shoot us an email and we can send you the slide deck, and then you could just go to this and it'll, the website itself. It will be an app to be downloaded on phones though. It's also to be used for people living in communities that have a room for rent or something like that, or that have apartments. They can also list it on there. And they can enter in their own information. We don't change it because regular people that live in apartments also use drugs. Regular people in apartments also have mental illness. Regular people in apartments drink an awful lot. So we don't change the questions at all. We're just trying to get the best match. All right, landlord engagement. Start with the landlords you know. Beg them, plead with them. Just kidding. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've made with landlords over the years is that we've made them feel like we are at their beck and call in terms of, hey, you're doing us a favor. But the reality is, from the homeless provider side, we're doing them a favor. We're leasing up some of their units that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to lease. We've guaranteed them rent that during COVID, some other landlords didn't get. So it's time for us to ask them to do something for us. And so the relationship has to be reciprocated. It cannot just be a one-sided relationship, but nonetheless, start talking to the landlords that we've had these long relationships with and say, it's your turn now, give back. Really talk about the stabilization services. So if you think about housing first, That might be a term that's familiar for some, but if it's not, housing first is that everyone moves indoors first. You cannot work with people and expect them to change behaviors when they're living outdoors or even in a shelter. It's just too hard. They're around so many different, women will use that have never used in their life simply to stay awake and stay safe. So I don't know if you've heard that, but women start using meth as a form to keep themselves safe when they're living on the street. So to ask them to stop using when they're living on the street or in a shelter environment is often very difficult. So really talk about the stabilization services. Housing first is you get them in, and then you have services that are wrapped around them, very similar to PSH, but in rapid rehousing or in permanent supportive housing, same thing. And then engage with the faith community. Oftentimes in the homeless services sector, we forget about faith, but faith typically are the number one group of folks that are willing to open up their doors and to try something new and different. And so I always encourage people, don't forget about faith. Bring them to the table and start having the conversation. Sometimes I am not the appropriate person to have that conversation with faith. We know this. So I hand it to dear friends that are. Know your audience. Okay, next slide. Landlord conversation. So talk about the long-term commitment. So the other piece, and this is what Veronica is really going to dive into, and I'm trying to be fast. I'm sorry, Veronica. I know I can't talk fast. But it really is around master leasing. So one of the great ways to be able to do shared housing is in our community is to pair it with master leasing, and we're starting to have the conversations both with HUD and our local government, our housing authorities, at the ability to master lease using federal dollars and even local dollars. It is incredibly important. If you're taking people out of encampments and you're moving them into housing, most of our people directly out of encampments are told no, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. We also know that the disenfranchised or people that have had the hardest time getting indoors are people of color. And so, as a matter of fact, I just pulled some statistics. I asked my team to do it. It took them 2 months, but they did it yesterday, where they showed the number of people that were actually moving into housing based on race and based on landlord by landlord or property management firm by property management firm, so that we can make decisions about who to stop using because they're just clearly have racist ways. So I think that, anyway, sorry, I went down a totally different path, but I think starting to have the conversation about master leasing is going to be incredibly important if we're trying to get some people with the hardest and most difficult barriers into housing, even through the rapid rehousing model, not the permanent supportive housing model, but you could do it on both sides. Veronica is going to talk really, really extensively about how cool that is and how it works at quickly moving people from street to home. And yeah, I think we already talked about the incentives and insurance stability. I'm a big fan of offering back-end incentives versus front-end incentives, because what landlords really give a damn about is that the rent's coming in every month. Next slide, please. Stabilization, we already talked about that, incredibly important. Better have a stabilization team, stabilization team, stabilization team. They better know what to do and how to do it. They don't all have to be clinicians. It's an incredibly awesome opportunity to be able to pair up people with lived expertise with a clinician to do this work. Next slide. And I think I'm done, because you're going to save these to the end, right? The miss? Yeah. Okay. I'm done, and now let me just, one thing, sorry. Veronica's like, I was ready. Okay, so what HUD says. Just so you know, this is a really important slide. HUD says you can do shared housing, period, end of story. You can split leases with federal money, you can split leases with Section 8 vouchers, you can split leases in developments, you can split leases. You are absolutely allowed to do it. The master leasing component is what we're working on the opposite side. And there are a lot of entryway points in to do it. Kind of tricky, but you can do it. What we're asking HUD to do is to change their policies, stop making it hard, make it easier for us to move people indoors. Take advantage of the time. COVID-19 has taught us a whole lot of stuff. It really has. It has given us the light on all the different things that we can do as a community, throwing money at us for the first time. When we were talking about scarcity before, we stopped talking about scarcity. By the way, we're almost back to scarcity again to a certain regard on the services end. So really thinking, though, about how you can take advantage of this time to look at shared housing as an option, to understand that we don't have enough units, and the conversation must change. It has to change. If we're not having this conversation amongst ourselves and amongst our clients and amongst the community at large, we're going to see more and more people fall out of into homelessness because they simply cannot afford rent, period. Veronica is from HOPIX. She's one of the smartest people, probably the smartest person I've ever met in my entire life. I'm proud to call her my colleague. Cynthia also is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. Hence this crew. Those people that didn't come today, they missed this.
Thank you, Chris. I'll take our, yeah. Okay, thank you. Good morning. Uh-oh. Sorry, we got two different things going on. Cynthia, where's your backspace?
Did I go too far? This one?
Okay. Yeah, no, we can go back, though. Back one slide. Thank you. All right, good. No. That's good. No, go to the next one because that's from the last presentation. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Veronica Lewis from HOPICS, Homeless Outreach Program Integrated Care System is what it stands for, and we're a division of special service for groups. So I'm very glad to be here with you today, and I want to just frame a little bit who we are and our the way that we just took some risk and tried. Shared housing and master leasing is going to make more sense. So really quickly, HOPICS, we're 34 years old at this time, and we are in LA County. We're primarily serving the region of LA County that has all of South Los Angeles in it and the cities of Compton and Linwood. And so we have a lot of, unfortunately, low-income communities that we are serving. We also are the most impacted in terms of families with children experiencing homelessness. As you may know, the area that has Skid Row has the most individuals, but we have the highest incidence of families experiencing homelessness. And so HOPICS operates in 3 major systems of care. We're a behavioral health provider, we're outpatient mental health, substance use, and just one of a few or over a dozen state-funded trauma recovery centers. We also are a reentry provider in doing a lot of work related to people returning home, as well as people who are still incarcerated, working to come out. And naturally, the largest part of our portfolio is homeless and housing services, which includes, 50 men and women that make up these multidisciplinary teams that take services to people living outdoors, and that's going to be important when I talk about my street to home effort in a second. Access centers for people who are willing to walk indoors. On any given night, HOPICS is keeping about 1,200 people, including 300 to 400 kids, off the street every night in a variety of interim housing programs, and then a variety of permanent housing stuff and some other ancillary pieces. It's okay. I'll just keep. I mean, I got to pay attention. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And so our team is made up of, largely about 40% of the people who work for HOPICS, and we have about a team of 360 now. We've grown significantly because of the local and state investment in the last 5 to 6 years. But the team is made up, 40% or more are made up of folks with lived experience, either formerly homeless, currently in recovery from addiction, a former or current consumer of mental health, and or formerly incarcerated. We also have a lot of paraprofessionals, certificated folks, substance use counselors, et cetera. We also have clinical social workers, MFTs, and so, and it's primarily 80% of our team is people of color, and 90% of our leadership team, including myself, obviously, are people of color. And so we are the community we serve, literally, and that matters. And so just to give you another, thank you. So just to give you a snapshot, so for fiscal year 2021, HOPICS serves about 20,000 folks a year. And we permanently moved households from homelessness, literal homelessness, to permanent housing, 1,117 households we permanently housed. We placed 395 of those households, primarily individuals, into shared housing settings. And we, at the time this presentation was created, we have 41 folks in the shared housing sites that we master lease. I think that number may be a little bit higher at this point. So let me get into the nuts and bolts of what we actually did. Okay, sorry, I'm talking fast too. Next slide. So a couple of years ago, we had this convergence of, many of you all have probably heard about Judge Carter, and we had a federal judge tell our county and city, like, get folks off the street. If you hadn't looked it up, it reads like fiction at times. And we also had all this COVID emergency money coming, ESG dollars, care funds. We had all this money coming, and LA primarily chose to use it, obviously, in addition to Project Roomkey, which most of you know about, to fund recovery rehousing, which was essentially a slightly more enhanced version of rapid rehousing. And, you know, for at least 3 to 4 years prior to that, our street-based engagement teams had done a significant amount of work, done rapport. And so we had all this stuff. And in particular, what drove the Street to Home effort for us is we had all this money. And as Chris articulated so well, we didn't have enough units to put people in. We had this pressure, new and added pressure, which was good in a sense conceptually, from a federal judge who had heard a case and required that our city and county figure out how to get at least a large fraction of the people who were living outdoors inside. And so, you know, I started to think about, well, what can we do? And so I pulled a group of landlords, because we're a rapid rehousing provider. I don't think I said that. That accounts for many of those 1,000 plus people that we house. But I started to think about, what can we do to use the resources, quickly get these folks off the street, and do it in a way where, because we're using rapid rehousing dollars or recovery rehousing dollars, they would be able to afford it. And so I came up with this idea of Street to Home, and I pulled some of our trusted landlords who are traditional landlords through our rapid rehousing relationships together and said, it was about 15 of them that showed up the first meeting, I think. And I said, I want to do a Street to Home effort. I told my team I want to move 100 people, 3 encampments in 90 days. And we need your help to do it. We have all this money. I know traditionally our rapid rehousing, obviously, a month, we'll see them. We may do home visits, not as intensive as it needs to be, especially if we're talking about people moving directly from the street. And we're going to be moving folks who may have been living outdoors for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. But my commitment to you is that we will we'll be there more often. And so I created, you know, what I've since named the RUSH model, the rapid unit, the HOPEX rapid unit scatter site supportive housing model, because essentially what we were trying to do is use it, but take the same principles of permanent supportive housing and apply them to a scatter site model that also included shared housing, which obviously Chris talked about our definition of shared housing, so I won't go into that, but just to be clear, where there's an individual lease per room. And so naturally the landlords asked a lot of questions, but before that meeting was over, I have 40 units secured already. And subsequently, folks talk to each other, and you know, I'm not gonna say it's been easy. We have a long lessons learned list that we want to that we'll be sharing sometime this week. But we tried it, and so within that same 90 days, my team moved 120 people off of the street, and we didn't even have Arroyo at that time. But again, the combination of leveraging our outreach and street-based engagement teams, obviously the rapid rehousing team, our housing team, and when I say housing, I mean the housing locators who have the relationships with the landlords, and just a lot of coordination and case coordination, we were able to, you know, as best as possible, match people. We did not just put everybody from one encampment in the same housing facility, because that doesn't work well, we've learned, for a variety of reasons. But we were able to match folks, and since then we've had to move a lot of folks around. But we, you know, one of the early things we did was, yes, this is your home, but we established community rules. We facilitated a process where the folks who were living together established community rules. We learned very quickly that we needed to put the staple pantry, imperishable items in the refrigerator, and because that food was one of the biggest causes of conflict. And so we're learning along the way, but we have a more than 95% retention rate. Since then, we've continued to, and I'm gonna jump into some of the other pieces in a second, but you know, this allowed us to use all these rapid rehousing resources and use existing units that were in the community. In LA, we have all these duplexes that are continuing to be built, where there's 5 bedrooms in each unit for a total of 10 units on the campus. I don't know, do you all have those in your communities? There's like a growth of those. Well, we happen to have those, so that may be a benefit. And so a lot of the owners and landlords we work with have that. So we're talking about 10 people in one setting. And so we were able to use existing units, and then, you know, we use the blended subsidies. Rapid rehousing is the primary, but as Chris has said, although we're still working with our housing authorities in LA to really fully realize this, if we were transitioning people to a higher or deeper subsidy, they could stay in place, and we're still working on the housing authority with that. And then, you know, some of the other considerations are related to property management, obviously. We master leased many sites before, but it was for the purpose of our interim housing. This was very different, and so we learned a lot. We brought in some people who came from the property management world, because again, we had people that were now 2 different things to us, right? Well, I'm getting into the master leasing, I'm sorry. But yeah, sorry, and my slides keep moving in front of me, you all. That's why I keep looking down the slides. It's okay. And the biggest piece of this was these resident support specialists. So we did not lean on the traditional wrap-free housing case managers alone to do this work. As I said, we have made a commitment to the landlords to be there regularly. And so we have these resident support specialists that we hired whose sole job was to be there. Now, it gets difficult, I will say, because the only common space is the living room, right? And so technically it's your home. And quite frankly, some people got frustrated with our team members showing up regularly, being in their living room. But it was critical, in particular in the first 30 days or so, to try to mitigate issues and help folks. Everybody has a key to their own room. They just have shared space. Okay, that's okay. I'm ready to move on. All right. And so next, thank you. So we part of it was with the landlords that committed to us, but the other piece we realized, and because we have so many, net relationships in the community, we realized we needed to, in order to expedite this process, we needed to begin to master lease. And so we started with the 120 people, but since then we've housed over, this is since September 2020, we've housed over 350 people directly from street encampments into housing, with a majority of that being in shared housing. Part of the strategy we use with master leasing, because there's many folks that own properties that want to contribute to the homelessness issue, but they don't want to manage and have our clients as their tenants. And so we were able to negotiate at the time 5, and then currently I think we have about 7 properties where we actually went into a 3 to 5 year contract. In some cases, I'll talk about our apartment building, which is obviously a little bit different. That's a 7-year contract, but we went into 5-year contracts. And so HOPEX literally is responsible for everything. We did get a discount because the owners would no longer be responsible for all the property management and some of the things that we would have to take care of. But that means that we control who came in the door, right? That means that we could furnish it and create the spaces that we needed to. And most of the considerations that lead to Chris saying that most of the people we're serving get lots of no's when they apply, no longer applied. In some cases, obviously, we had to negotiate with owners because they still wanted to have some input during our master leasing negotiations about who would come in. But for the most part, we took away all those caveats that exist. And so we control who came in the door. And we also were able to provide on-site support. Initially, again, obviously, the primary thing we've done was for people coming outside indoors, and so it's primarily singles and couples. But I'm proud to say that we're on our 2nd family interim housing sites. And so we're doing small families, and so currently we have 10 families in one of the locations that we master lease. The other shared housing site is not one that we master lease, but we have 10 families, no more than 3 people. So it may be like, 1 parent and 2 small children, or a couple and 2 small children. And they've gotten along well. Obviously, in addition to the community rules that I talked about earlier, there's some other considerations when you have people's children, right? Because we have that even in where you have multiple family members in one household, where you have different ways that you want to discipline your children or not. You have different ways that you want to feed your children. And so, the community rules and kind of setting the tone for how folks would coexist, we purposely looked at some additional considerations, right? And obviously, for this, we did look at Megan's Law, and there's some other things that we put in place as we looked at children being in the household, but we have successfully been able to do this, and the retention rate is high. The other thing with us master leasing, the other benefit is everybody had an individual lease with us, but we have had some personality conflicts, so it's been simpler for us to switch people, transition them, and adjust their leases because we control the sites. And so one other thing, I know we're talking about shared housing, but because this is a missed opportunity with all the developers in the room and financiers in the room. So one of the other sites that we opened in October is a brand new apartment building with primarily one that we master leased. A brand new apartment building with a partner, Solar Impact. 28 units, and we actually were able to obviously weigh in on the construction, what it would look like, make sure that it met the needs of the folks we would serve. Initially, it was supposed to be for single adults, but my team begged, and so we have some small families, and so it's a blended. We have small families, single adults, we have older adults. It's a mixed bag of folks. But this was unique because naturally it wasn't just a conversation with the owner, because it was literally in construction and development, but a lot of the negotiations from the master lease came from what the financial institution that was funding the construction and development wanted to see. And so what I want to offer to you all, part of the hang up was who was going to come inside, right? The financial institutions had a lot of input, and so it took us 3 months to finalize that master lease, obviously with our attorney involved. And so what I want to offer up to you, again, some of what we're trying to create in these shared housing models, we're not just putting people in these places and leaving them. And so part of the master leasing strategy that Chris talked about is not only for shared housing, but we have thousands of units coming online in Los Angeles. And obviously we have a low vacancy rate, so people that have never been unstably housed, we don't want to take all the stock from them. At the same time, it takes a long time to build affordable housing project-based. It takes a long time to build PSH. And so we have all these resources with these emergency housing vouchers and other things, and we're trying to find a way to do it. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is rethink about criteria. If you were from a financial institution, if you're a developer, rethink about criteria, especially if you can work alongside a trusted provider who will provide on-site support. And as Chris said, people who have never experienced housing instability, as you all know, can be some of the worst tenants that you've ever had. And you don't have any support. So I just want to put that out there. But yeah, we successfully, and so we have, 28 units that were out, and that's a 7-year master lease. And we are pushing, as Chris said, for our state, local, and federal partners to take that to scale, because for me, with the master leasing, unfortunately, it is high risk. And so that's why Chris is clapping for me and my other partners, everybody's looking from the side, because there is a high risk, because again, I didn't get any program funding for this. I literally just got creative with rapid rehousing money, and I said I'm doing it. But I'm pushing because there's damage cost that's not really covered. There's property management costs that's not covered. God forbid this will be a last resort, but if there's some eviction related matters, then we'll do that. So we are trying to push that it becomes an actual model at this time. And then just really quickly, some of the other things we're providing. And so I said, so we have a benefit because we do a lot of different things, but even if we didn't do them internally, we would have, thank you, there's a smiley face that says slow down, sorry. We would still link to folks. And so in addition to the resident support specialists who were there, obviously, just to try to build community and mitigate conflict, we also offer support if people were willing. It's a housing first model, but if people were willing or are interested in support, we took to the site, we take to our master lease sites and just our general shared housing sites the opportunity for substance use support. We also provide mental health and trauma recovery support at these sites, as well as employment support. So it's not just, all those things are tied to housing stabilization as well, as you know. And so while people are not forced in the same way that PSH folks are not forced, it's critically important to provide those resources. And so we do provide them on site. And I'll stop there for now. Did I miss anything that you want to mention? Okay. Thank you, and then we'll turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Veronica. So I know people have probably tons of questions. I'm going to just ask a couple of questions looking at the time here. I'm going to ask a few questions just because we had some questions we had prepared for our fantastic panelists. And when I say that these folks are doing really innovative work, I used to work at the National Alliance on Homelessness, so I've worked in many, many communities around the country. And so the need for us to do this kind of work in California is intensely, as Chris and Veronica said, it's a must. We really don't know how we're gonna be able to get people into the number of units that we need without doing this. But it is something that it is a big innovation that you all are doing. I mean, they are doing this in pockets across the country, but this is really sort of very much on the front edge of what is being done, what is sort of master leasing, and especially having a matching tool, but really it's what is needed. And I think the more and more, as Chris said, that we normalize this, I've noticed over the last few years, 3 or 4 years ago when we would say this, people would look at us like we were crazy, and now people are starting to really understand that this is just having roommates and that there's ways to do this, that master leasing seemed impossible before in terms of doing this the way that Hopix is doing it, but it is doable, and it just takes a lot of intention and focus and people who really believe in it. And again, it's sort of a must. It is a must. So I wanted to ask just a few things that I've heard a lot about in terms of some of people's concerns around this, and just see kind of what you all would say. So we know that one of the concerns is that people are, there's this sort of popular conception that permanent housing is independent living, and that people really have to live by themselves, that it's not fair, that we're treating people less than if we're not giving them their own units. And so that comes from advocates, that comes from people serving folks, so of course, people who want to choose where they want to live. So how do you respond to that?
Do you want to go first?
I don't know the data exactly, but there's many people who have never experienced housing instability that have roommates, simply because it's affordable. And I think that, I didn't get to say this. I had this epiphany last night while the three of us were talking, and I may not like this because you're actually affordable housing developers, but for me, it's about shifting the narrative to say that shared housing is one of many affordable housing interventions. And so what many of you do in terms of project-based development is one. And so I think shifting it, because that's the reality of people who go to work every day, who have never not known where they were going to lay their head. And so that's my answer. It's not unfair. It's about people being able to sustain their rent beyond the time-limited subsidies that most of them will have access to.
And I would just add, how many of you are married or born or have children or a pet? Like, that this is not crazy. It's not weird. It's not strange. Sure, you may or may not know the person you move in with. One of the cool things about Arroyo that we're doing now is actually going back and doing the survey on all the people that are currently in shared housing at Veronica's sites to see if the flags that the caseworkers have noticed through their conversations are flags that the tool actually would have found on the front end, so that we can start building plans to mitigate that right away. We do these meet and greets after people are kind of connected to see, and we bring up as part of their meet and greet, or I like to call it speed dating, but we bring up all the flags that we were able to identify so we can work on those. I just want to say another thing when it comes to that, is that the one thing I forgot to mention, I've been with LA Family Housing, as Cynthia said, for a very long time. I am OLD. I know I look fabulous. It's called Botox, but you're supposed to laugh. Is there anything? Just kidding. But I am old. I've been with LA Family Housing for 21 years, and I started off on the ground. But outside of COVID, I spent a lot of time traveling the country doing consultant work. And one of the topics that I like to talk about the most, and what I work with communities the most, from government entity down, is how to create a shared housing model within your community. Because there isn't one community in this country right now that isn't experiencing the same thing we are. It's a different scale. But if in West Virginia your income is $0 and the rent is $500, and your income is $0, you still can't afford it. If you don't have enough units for them to move into, there's still nowhere for them to move into. And there's still a lot of people that are falling out of housing. And I might mention, when you look at a community like West Virginia, you have the opioid center of the world, the crisis of the world. And so there, community by community, there just hasn't been one. I've been up and down this state. I've in many different communities in the state having the same conversation about why there's a need. So I think independent living, look at y'all, I'm married, and there's no way I could afford my house without my lawyer wife. There's just no way. So it's just a reality that it doesn't matter where you are in this country, if we don't have enough units to give and we don't have enough affordable units and all of those things, that this is a very normal way to live. We just have to change the narrative to help people get there.
And to that end, just really quick, I say to those advocates, take it to the people who have failed to include housing as a part of infrastructure development, which is why we're here in this space where we don't have one units. And so that's my call. Take your concerns to those folks so that in 20 years we actually may have enough private units. But for now, we have all these resources. People are losing resources because there's no units to acquire. And so this is the next best thing, and it allows people to live in a community, and it allows them to afford to stay there.
With or without a subsidy.
With or without a subsidy.
Thank you. Another thing that you mentioned, both of you talked a little bit about this, were the landlord hesitation and the risk factors that landlords are expecting. And that when I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the risk factors, but also you talked about front-end incentives and back-end incentives. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
I'll talk about the back end and from the non-master lease side, and I'll let Veronica talk about the master lease side, although I think it's all relevant and kind of flows. The biggest issue is that they're afraid that what do they do when they have a person who leaves? So they have a 3-bedroom apartment, one person leaves, now what? How do you get the next person? The thing I remind them of when we're having conversations with landlords is in Los Angeles, I got 60,000 more people right behind that person. I'll match someone to that unit.
And where you enter the back end incentive is to say, instead of us giving you $2,500 on the front end to move somebody in, just, I own rental property. If somebody were to give me a really high security deposit, I'm gonna go spend that security deposit, and then tomorrow I totally forgot you gave me a really high security deposit until you move out and you want your money back, right? And I'm like, oh dang, I gotta get that money. But the reality is, what I really care about on the business side is that every month my rent's coming in. So if you have someone that moves out, the incentive, in my opinion, really needs to be built into the back end to ensure the sustainability while you find a new roommate. And really making sure that you have the right system in place, because I have to tell you, one of the things we recognize in our first stab at doing shared housing, really intentional, paying attention to every single component, so that as we build this out and as we start to prepare to roll this out to other communities, we can talk about all the things that Veronica talked about, like all the train wrecks we had, so you don't repeat and have the same mistake. One of them was somebody moved out and somebody forgot to tell somebody that somebody moved out. And so the landlord's sitting there and they don't really know what to do. And so it's been 6 months and they haven't had any rent coming in on that one bedroom, and then they're pissed and they want the money for those 6 months. So really making sure that you have the right safety net to ensure as somebody moves out, there is somebody there catching it. Because the other thing to remember is, on the rapid rehousing side, or even permanent, more on the rapid rehousing side, subsidies end, but people are gonna stay there. They're not moving on. And if they move on, it's just like me or you moving on. You figure out how to pay your rent, moving on to the next place, your security deposit, moving on to the next place. We get married, we get jobs, we lose jobs, ebbs and flows of life. And so if some great circumstance happened and you moved out, you're paying it on your own. And so you might not have a caseworker involved anymore. So what is that safety net to be able to catch to make sure that there's a back-end payment kind of coming through? And that's what we're working with the local government, federal government on right now, is how do we create those back-end incentives to ensure that even if you don't have a body, a person, a name, that you can pay for the bed for up to 2 to 3 months while you're trying to refill it. And it should not take 2 to 3 months, by the way.
Yeah, so in terms of master leasing, I have had 3 to 4 developers who have construction coming online sometime in the next 6 to 18 months because of my success with the solar 28-unit building reach out to me and say, I want to give you this building, right? Because they know I wasn't waiting on the subsidy, I just did it. And so I keep having those things, but our system, as we said, is not structured to allow us to do that, because I'm not going to take all that risk. Like, I'm not that crazy. I'm a little crazy.
She's a little crazy.
I'm not going to enter into those types of agreement without any actual backing from our public partners. But the reason that's happening is because when you want to talk about incentives, I'm paying you the rent for to lease the entire building, whether or not I have a tenant. So that is the incentive, and that's why almost every other week somebody's introducing somebody to me who's working on the development who says, I want to give you my building. Are you ready for it? Because you don't have to worry about any of those headaches. You're not getting calls in the middle of the night, and you're going to get your rent no matter what happens. And so that's the primary reason why these owners are willing to attach. But in terms of risk factors, unfortunately, as an organization, we're taking on many other risks. And, I'll be honest, we've had fires, we've had all kinds of things, right? And so part of the reason also owners want to work with us is because they don't want to deal with some of the things that may come up. And, for some folks, especially, again, my motto, this master leasing doesn't have to be in the same way that I use it. I'm literally moving people who have been outdoors for years inside. So the dynamic there is a little bit different, and we've had all kinds of things. But I think that, again, that's where having a regular presence of our resident support specialists, really recognizing really quickly, to Chris's point about the red flags and adjusting folks, is where, and having our eyes on what's actually happening in these communities is allowing us to make adjustments and try to mitigate some of the issues. But yeah, it's a win-win for most owners. Because they're getting their rent no matter what. And, essentially in terms of their responsibility versus ours, it's like they're responsible for things inside the walls, for lack of a better term, and we're responsible for things outside the walls or things that are caused by our tenants.
Just one other thing I want to add to that Veronica's model right now that she's talking about is an entire building. I'm a huge fan of decentralization as well. And so I like by any single unit we can get our hand on, even if it's one unit in one apartment building, I'm like, let's get it. Let's figure out a way to master lease that, because it starts to help spread folks around too. And as folks spread around, people's behaviors often change based on the social norm of the building that they're living in. Mm-hmm. And so it's not 100%, but if if you're not having loud parties every night, no other neighbors having loud parties, most people are in by 8 and it's just kind of quiet, you start to see people's behaviors kind of change toward that. And so I am a huge fan of, and what I've been talking about a lot on our end has been Every single unit we can get our hand on, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms, take them, get them, master lease them. We'll supply the people to go into them. And instead of housing one person at a time, we can house 3 people at a time, 4 people at a time, and make a huge impact very
10
quickly.
people at a time, like
10
we've been
people at a
doing.
time, yep.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say that I've learned from watching folks in LA do rapid rehousing, which of course we know is harder because it's a shorter term subsidy. It's permanent housing, 2 to 3 years, but you all do amazing amounts of rapid rehousing, even in really difficult markets. And one of the things I tried, when we were training providers on how to do this, we're always saying, remember, landlords have lots of difficult tenants. It's not just that our tenants are the only people that ever have issues. Landlords have issues with tons of their tenants. And we have to remember that we're not asking for a favor, we're actually offering landlords things that they don't get with other tenants. They don't have people to move, to turn over units, to feed a new person in. They don't have to do any of that work that's really expensive, right? I know in San Francisco we pay holding fees for some units because we have to take units right off the market, right? We might not have someone to move in that day, but we can in a week, so we'll pay a week or 2 of holding fees with that landlord. I'm not sure if you're doing that between roommates, but it's something that we just have to do, and remember that is a selling point, and that, again, we are giving landlords something that they just don't get with other tenants. I'm gonna stop right there. And I know there's some audience questions, and I want to see if there's any online questions. So I know there's a question in the back. Before you ask your question, just so people can hear us at home, we're going to bring the mic over to you to ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. I have a few questions kind of in line to the same thing. I'm actually a services coordinator for our development company. So it's a development company down to the services, kind of like the things that you guys are talking about. So let me start with actually my last question. This type of program, is this something that we have here in the Bay Area that we could utilize? And is there someone we could contact to find out about that? So I'll start there, then I have 2 more.
That's you. Yes. What can I ask? What Bay Area community did you say you're from?
We're kind of Contra Costa, Alameda County.
So there are people doing shared housing. There are programs doing shared housing in various Bay Area counties. In San Francisco, we have a small pilot going with rapid rehousing for transition age youth called Rising Up, where we have sort of a matching form. To say it has been a little bit difficult during the pandemic to realize kind of when right before then we started it, especially because we had more units available during the pandemic, and rent actually dropped in San Francisco. So there was some challenge around that. But the Bay Area, in Alameda County, in Oakland, there are programs that are doing, there's a program called BACS, the Bay Area Community Services. I don't know if anyone from here is there. They're doing shared housing. I know folks in Santa Clara County are doing, I can give you some ideas about that, but there are folks who are doing this. In terms of having an actual tool, I haven't seen one as developed as the one that LA Family Housing is doing, though there are other communities. There are actually tools that you can bring to your community from Seattle, from Phoenix, that they are actually contracting out. There's something called Pad Mapper in Phoenix. There's something called Housing Connector. That's not so much of a roommate sort of tool, but it is actually helping screen landlords for our clients to be able to use really an online platform to find units. And so I can give you more of that, but there are some examples of it, and we can talk afterwards.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Now, you were stating that the landlord would not have to worry about getting their rent paid. So are you saying that your organization is actually paying for the units, kind of like Section 8 does for vouchers?
No, I wouldn't qualify it that way. So whatever the fair market rate is for units, so say it's a 10-unit building, and let's, for simple math, say $1,000, right? So that means that's $10,000 a month. And we pay them $10,000 a month regardless of whether or not the units are filled, because we are technically the property manager. That's what I mean. And the resource that we're primarily using to do that right now is rapid rehousing. We are in the process, many of the folks that are in our shared housing units, we obviously have referred for emergency housing vouchers, but that's what I mean. The landlord, they get $10,000 a month from us as the lessee, no matter which units are filled.
Okay, now is that type of organization also in the Bay Area, or is there a connector partner that you can give information about?
All I can say, I mean, I've been contacted by a couple of organizations in San Francisco to come and speak. I've done, like I said, I've done a lot of speaking on this part, in this part of California on that. So I think I don't know that there is one yet in terms of master leasing. I think as we change the policies, and I promise you, Veronica and I, and another one of our colleagues, I'm adding Veronica to that. We put on our, he told me on our tombstones, it's gonna say, we tried. But I will not give up until these policies change because we need to move people indoors. We have to move people indoors, and this is a way to do it much more quickly. So I fully anticipate that there are some agencies up here, once we get those policies in place, or at least the start of those policies in place, where they feel protected,
Yeah.
that they will invest. None of us as nonprofits, we're not indemnified. So when we're sued, we got to pay, right? We're not government, and so we've got to protect ourselves. But I do think as the policies come online and more government agencies have established the rules kind of behind it, you will start seeing the agencies partake, because it only makes our life easier. We're able to move way more people in way more quickly.
But in the meantime, I would just encourage you, just in case there's somebody crazy like me that'll try it anyway, try to connect with the providers in your community that do have rapid rehousing vouchers, or that do help clients access Section 8 or emergency housing. That would be my recommendation for now.
And I'll say in San Francisco, I mean, we are trying this, but you both said something really important, which was selling it to your providers. I mean, for folks who are providers or are working with providers, having folks really understand and have the script and have the selling point and really start to believe in it seems to be critical in terms of clients actually choosing it. And so that's a really important piece. There are folks, you can bring Chris to your community to do training and really help your community kind of start at. Veronica too. I didn't want to get both of you involved. But we can, it's a really important way to do it. And there are folks who are doing training on this. So I'm just going to turn to a question from folks from home. So this is a question for you, Veronica. Would a family of 3 ever be only in a 1-bedroom? I'm not sure if that's a family of 3 in terms of parents and a child, or I don't have enough clarity.
We have the what's it called, whatever the rules are related
habitability standard.
It's not habitability, the other term in terms of how many people can be in a unit. Yes, if it's two small children, for sure. Yeah, or if it's a couple, even and a child, we make it work. We'll do it.
And I would just say, I'm going to add to that I helped facilitate a HUD waiver about 4 years ago that actually increased the number of occupants per room. I'm not a huge fan of overcrowding.
Thank you, occupancy standards.
Yeah, occupancy standards. I'm not a huge fan of overcrowding. What I am is that back in the day when we had, very time-limited subsidies for families, and you were throwing them to a 2-bedroom unit that was $1,600 or $1,700 a month, and all they could afford was a studio apartment, I got to tell you, I'd rather have the family live in the studio apartment successfully than ever end up back on a bus stop. And so I challenged HUD. It took us 2 years, and we won based on square footage. In the state of California, I just have to be clear, it's like the first 250 square feet or something for one person, and then all you need is 50 additional square feet after that. That's kind of our only, unless you have your own municipality rules, that is the state rule. And so we were able to win on that in Los Angeles. And so we were able to increase the number of participants. So I could move with HUD money, with federal money, not on the voucher side, but on the rapid rehousing side, because it's still the same. There's still stuff to do on the voucher side, but they're working on it. But on the rapid rehousing side, we were able to move people in and get money back. We were moving people in that way, and the head of our continuum did not reimburse us any of the money for the families that we had moved in that way. And so it took us 2 years, but we won the waiver and all the back payment, which was nice.
Yeah, so sometimes you try and you win. And I will say that a lot of times when people are saying, no, we can't do that because of this, or our building has these regulations, or a certain affordable housing program has, requirements, asking why and what else can you change really is kind of, a lot of things can change if you sort of start to say, well, why is that? What do we have to do to change it?
You too can have a tombstone that says you tried.
And won. I know we just have a couple minutes. I know there was another question in the back there.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I just want to say I really like that you guys are shaking it up at a policy level. Good job on that. I had a question in regard to like the resident support specialist, your staffing on site. Is that like, is it 24/7? Can you describe that a little bit more from a staffing?
Sure. For the share housing model?
Correct.
Yeah, no, we're not, because these are people's homes, right? And most of them, there's no actual like conference room because it's not project-based PSH. So and again, I call it rush. But so no, we're not there 24 hours, but depending upon the dynamics in the house, the team may be there every day, right? And depending upon the dynamics, if it's still kind of touchy, that determines whether they're there during the day or at night. But no, we're, in some cases, our team going twice a week during the day just to check in is sufficient. In other cases, especially if it's a newer home, or again, if there's just conflict, they'll be there every day. So it's contingent upon the environment.
And I would back that up. Even in our model where we have, I don't do large models. I like the 2, 3s, and 4 bedrooms for us. But when we do those, the first 90 days are the most critical in order to get people to work out the issues that arise. Because just think of when you moved in with your new partner that you love so much. Things were so sunny, and you thought he was this way or she was this way, and then you moved in, you're like, holy crap, you lied, you sold me a fake story, fake news right here. So, most of those things come up pretty quickly, and so you have to be there, not to mitigate in our world, but to help coach them to mitigate. Because if they learn how to solve their own problems, they can live on their own. So for the first 90 days-ish, we're there, to Veronica's point, almost every single day, if not every day, minus some of the weekend days, but definitely available by call. We do have an on-call system that can address that. What I would say though is, but it is so critical to get in there and help them develop their relationship, help teach them how to solve their own problems and identify the problems and not bury them. And oftentimes if you just call and you're not actually present, knocking on the door, seeing it, they'll say, oh, no, everything's fine. But when you're in there is when you can actually see like the tension that, when somebody walks by each other and they look at them like crazy, like, okay, we've got something going on here. Let's sit down and try to figure out how to talk. Yeah. I'm also a huge fan of in stabilization that each client has their own navigator or stabilizer rather, that is separate from the other person's, because you don't want, in our game, we don't want them saying, you like Joe better than you like me. And so you always have Joe's side. You have 2 advocates. And it's about not having anybody's side. It's about coaching them on how to solve their own problems.
Or identifying if you need to make a transition.
Yeah, and there might be times that you do have to move people.
Which is really important.
And can you share your matching tool, Chris? I think you said that it is, for the website is there.
Yeah, it's Arroyo, a room of your own. Ellie, it's on one of the slides. I suck. I don't even remember. It's not there.
I'll find it.
I don't remember the actual website.
You can access it when you download the slide.
But I'm more than happy to. Yeah, I'm more than happy to also. There you go, arroyomatch.com. But it will be an app very, very soon, uploaded to anybody's phone. At least in Los Angeles right now, and our goal is to have. We've had lots of conversation with community by community because it's such a critical piece of how you're matching people moving in together.
So, do we have one more? Okay, one last question. I know we're at time.
10:15.
Thank you. I had a question. Have you seen any developers take up this model for new construction? You kind of alluded to some of the efficiencies, and I certainly agree. I'm an architect, and our 3-bed, 2-baths are, on a square foot basis, the most efficient, but we tend to do few of them because they're harder to lease up. But if you had a successful model to lease them up, I could see there being a huge incentive for new construction to see that happen. But have you seen that happen?
As it relates to shared housing or
Yeah,
master
so
leasing?
using a shared housing model, but for project-based new construction.
You have a bunch of people building for you now.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, most of the developers are reaching out to me are still doing 1-bedrooms, but what they're starting to say is, tell us what you need, right? Mm-hmm. So I am starting to have those conversations. The ones that are already past pre-construction and they're actively working, most of those unfortunately are 1-bedroom. But people are starting to say, again, if we can come up with the resources to really back this model, tell us what you need. I have developers saying we'll build 2 and 3 bedrooms. Right, if you need them, which we do, not only for shared housing, but I got large families from South LA. 9, 10 kids. So yeah, I'm starting to hear that. Tell me what you need for future developments.
My understanding is one of Cynthia's former colleagues, Steve Bergen, I might be wrong, but I believe that there's a lot of conversation happening on building more units for shared housing for single adult population PSH model. So
that'd be
I
great.
would say, yeah.
And I mean, in San Francisco, because of the market changed during COVID, and there was a lot of buildings, workspaces, spaces for students that were kind of meant for. There's a building we're looking at through HomeKey that was really meant to be for students or people who were kind of living together, but it was 4 bedrooms with a shared kitchen. But it is really meant there's locks on each there's locks on each door. People live independently, but it really was meant to be kind of more for students or work-live space. And we're now trying to get those and turn some of those into big family units. And it's doable. And these were new construction buildings that are just sitting empty. And so we are really looking at, because it's hard to find large family units in San Francisco. So we're really trying to be as creative as possible. So I know we're at time. I know we'd want to hear much more of what they have to say. I just want to say thank you to Chris and Veronica for speaking with us today. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure they would be happy to talk to you and share their information. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.